Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host. And today I will be finishing or completing the Ramadan 2024 special series of conversations on classic books of Islamic civilization. And today I'm going to talk to you about Al-Biruni's India. Al-Biruni was from Khwarizmi in today's Uzbekistan, and he was a very prominent scientist, scholar, philosopher, mathematician. I will talk a lot about him soon, but this is the book that I have chosen to talk about in this Ramadan. Al-Biruni's India. It is also known as Tarikh fil Hind or Tahqiq Ma'lil Hind in Arabic. And it is a fantastic book that he wrote over a period of 13 years from 1017 to 1030. So roughly about 1,000 years ago. It's amazing. And I will share some parts of the book with you. So you will get an idea of what an incredible book this is. But before that, I have to do some office work. I want to especially thank the Islamic Community Center of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who are co-hosting this series. So thank you very much for your support. I also want to thank two doctors, Dr. Raza Khan and Dr. Wasim Khan, for supporting these conversations. But before I start talking about who Al-Biruni was and what this book is all about, please subscribe to Conversations if you have not already done so. Like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this with all of you. We are close to the end of Ramadan. I hope that you had a spiritually and religiously enriching month, brought you closer to God, brought you closer to yourself. And so I also want to wish all of you a happy Eid in advance. Eid is in 3 or 4 days, inshallah. So let's begin. Al-Biruni was from a town which is now renamed as Al-Biruni after him. It is in Uzbekistan. It was in those days called Khwarizm. And there was, at least 200 years before him, a very famous Muslim Central Asian mathematician called Al-Khwarizmi, who hailed from that particular town. He actually wrote a famous book called Algebra on Mathematics, from which we get the word algebra. And also the word algorithm also comes from Al-Khwarizmi. So it is from that town that Al-Biruni came, and he lived there and he studied. He was interested in astronomy. He was a mathematician interested in trigonometry as well as algebra. He was also a historian, and he was keenly interested in Islamic philosophy. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of his life was his ongoing debate with the famous Islamic philosopher, Dr. Avicenna or Ibn Sina. They disputed over the nature of the universe. Apparently, at least from what I gathered from Al-Biruni, is that Ibn Sina believed that the creation was timeless, whereas Al-Biruni believed in the text of the Quran that the whole creation was created from nothing. So it was a debate about whether things existed, whether time existed all the time, or was time also created. So that was the debate that Al-Biruni was having with Ibn Sina, and so they wrote letters to each other. So I'm curious now. I've not seen those letters, but I will go look for them, and when I do, I will probably share with you on Conversations. So some of the things that Al-Biruni is famous for is one of the things that he did, which was incredible, is he calculated the radius of the Earth, and his accuracy was close to 1 to 2%. And that is absolutely fantastic. And he did it in a very simple and geometric and geometry and trigonometry, and I'll show you how he did it very quickly. He also did something incredible. He predicted the existence of the Americas. He argued that between Europe and Asia in the Atlantic Ocean, there must be a large landmass. There just can't be an ocean from Europe all the way to Asia. And so he kind of predicted that there must be Americas, which I found quite interesting. He was also very keen in terms of engaging with Greek philosophy. And so when he came to India, he learned Sanskrit, and he also engaged with Hindu scholars in India, Hindu philosophers in India. He was very keen student of Indian philosophy. He spent 13 years in India. He translated two books from Sanskrit to Arabic, Samakhya and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And what is interesting is in his book, which we will call Al-Biruni's India, as it is called in this northern edition, he basically summarized Hindu beliefs, religious beliefs, Hindu values, culture. He even talked about the games. He found a very fascinating form of chess, which I will show you, that he describes in the book. It is amazing. It has 80 chapters in it. It goes much in detail. But before that, let me very quickly tell you how he calculated the radius of the Earth so accurately. So basically, he conducted this experiment near Nandana Fort. So what he did was he basically needed a tall mountain and a flat plain, and he found that in what is today's Pakistan. And Nandana Fort is the venue, and you can see the picture here. So he used the height of the mountain and basically three angles. The angle at which the tangent from or the extension of the line from the height of the mountain to where it met with the horizon. So that angle, and then he calculated two other angles. He moved away from the mountain. He took an angle to the top of it. Then he measured the distance to another point and then measured. So he measured these two angles. And based on that and the height of the mountain, he was able to calculate, and you can see the trigonometric calculations. A lot of people have replicated his experiments. If you go to YouTube and just Google Al-Biruni and radius of the Earth, you will see several such videos, but the best one is the one that was done by BBC, which basically replicated his experiment, and they also got pretty accurate readings using Al-Biruni's methodology. This picture that you see is of the Nandana Fort, where he conducted the experiment to measure the radius of planet Earth. And this picture is one of those iconic pictures that is from his book, where Al-Biruni describes the different phases of the moon. As I said, he translated the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. He loved this book. It is very clear from his writing that he was quite impressed by the contents of the book. So I want, before I preface or talk about his books, I want to preface it with the comments that I found him quite philosophical. I did not really expect it. The first time I read Al-Biruni was 20 years ago while I was in grad school. And at that time, I was not very familiar with Islamic philosophy and the debates that kept Muslim philosophers engaged. Now that I know of the debates and the theological debates also between rationalists and traditionalists in the Islamic tradition, I was able to appreciate Al-Biruni's knowledge and familiarity with all of those debates and his profound understanding of those debates. So keep that in mind as we go along, that he was philosophical and he was more interested in philosophy. In his opening of the book, he talks about methods, he talks about why people lie, and so he emphasizes the need to separate falsehood from truth, and essentially talks about his methodology, in which he says very clearly that, look, my goal is to describe things as I see it and as I find them. I'm not neither here to criticize them nor to praise them. Whether you accept them, whether you find them reasonable or not, that's up to you. I'm going to tell the story as I see it. So it was a very interesting, and that is why Al-Biruni is also considered the father of anthropology. He's perhaps the first anthropological scholar. I might imagine 13 years of field work and learning the language. And this is what area studies people do here in political science, etc. You learn the language, you go and do field work, and then you come back and write your dissertation. Al-Biruni did the same thing. He learned the language, understood read the main books of India, engaged with many of the philosophers. It is very clear that he read Patanjali, he read Samakya, he read the Bhagavad Gita, he read Mahabharata, he read the Vedas and the Puranas and the Upanishads. It's very clear from the book itself, where he summarizes some of them, identifies them, lists all the various Puranas that he encountered. And so it was very clear that he did a very thorough job of his research. But there was clearly this philosophical, he was less social scientific and more philosophical, even though his observations are incredible. And I want you to keep that in mind. Besides being the father of anthropology, Al-Biruni is also seen as the father of geodesy, which is the science of understanding and studying the planet Earth, its geography, circumference, etc. Anyway, so the first thing he writes about Hindus is that he talks about their beliefs. He says the Hindus believe with regard to God that he is one, eternal, without beginning and end, acting by free will, almighty, all-wise, living, giving life, ruling, preserving. One who in his sovereignty is unique, beyond all likeness and unlikeness, and that he does not resemble anything, nor does anything resemble him. In order to illustrate this, we shall produce some extracts from their literature, but lest the reader should think that our account is nothing but hearsay. What I found fascinating about this paragraph, that's why I read it, is that for every description of God that he gives, first of all, he sees Hindus believing as monotheists who regard that God is one, he's eternal. These are all attributes of God that you will find in Quran. God is one. God is eternal. He is Samad. He is without the beginning and the end. He's acting by free will. He's almighty, Al-Qadir. He's all-wise, Al-Hakim. He's living, Al-Hayy. He gives life. There are so many names of God which come, Musawwir, etc., about him being a creator. And his sovereignty is Al-Muqtadir. It's amazing. And then he says, beyond all likeness and unlikeness, that he does not resemble anything. Laisa ka mislihi. These are all in the Quran. So when I first read it, I said, what is he trying to do? Is he trying to project the Islamic concept of one God on Hinduism? But then he goes on to say, no, look, this is how they thought of it. And he continues to sprue it from the Bhagavad Gita, especially. He also says this is what educated people believe about God. They call him Ishwar, self-sufficing, beneficent, who gives without receiving. They consider the unity of God as absolute. He repeats this in the book, but that everything beside God, which may appear as unity, is really a plurality of things. So I found this very fascinating, that he essentially sees Hinduism as a monotheistic religion. And then he says, look, let's look at the discussions from the Patanjali. And he repeats and translates some of the text right here. So he says, the student asks the master about God's knowing. He says, his knowing is the same from all eternity, forever and ever. This is also a very Islamic concept, that there can be no change in God. God does not learn. He knows everything. He always knew everything. The people says, where does this knowledge come? The master says, his knowing is the same from all eternity, forever and ever. So, and praise and celebrate him who has spoken the Veda as before and was before the Veda. So he talks about God and his knowledge. But the main point that he tries to make is, he says, there are educated, and he uses the word ashraf, elite people who are capable of philosophical abstraction, and then there are ordinary people. He says the most essential point of the Hindu world of thought is that which the Brahmins think and believe. So he holds the Brahmins in a very high esteem. He says these are the knowledgeable ones, these are the spiritual ones, these are the scholarly ones. So their values and their beliefs of Hinduism is what matters about Hinduism. For they are specially trained for preserving and maintaining their religion. And this is it which we explain, the belief of the Brahmins. So it's very clear in saying that when I'm talking about God, I'm talking about what the Brahmins are talking about. And he does acknowledge that the ordinary people who are non-Brahmins have a variety of beliefs and practices and He does not dwell much. To him, he values this so much. So he talks about the creation, and it is very clear that he's very fond of Krishna and refers to him as Vasudeva, and constantly keeps quoting Vasudeva from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Mahabharata, and elsewhere too. I'm skipping now and moving to the sixth chapter, in which he talks about the different worlds that the Hindus perceive creation as. He says that they see the world as composed of three lokas, three worlds. He says the higher one is Swaraloka or paradise, the lower one is Nagaloka or the hell, and then you have the Madhyaloka or Manushya This is the world where we all live. And then he does something very interesting where he quotes from the Bhagavad Gita and says, Vasudeva is telling this to Arjun. I am the universe without a beginning by being born, or without an end by dying. And he's clearly fascinated with the philosophical and the highest intellectual way of understanding the existence and the being of God. It reminded me a lot about Ibn Arabi's concept of God as an ocean without a shore. He talks about the Vedas and the Puranas and the various literature. He does a pretty good job of listing. So, for example, he provides this entire list of the Puranas. He says the first list is the one that he saw. And then he says, I have only read these 1, 2, 3 Puranas, and then I found from other people these lists of the Puranas. So he does a very systematic documentation of the religious texts. The medieval and later Muslim scholars are very good at this. They call them Fahrists. So they would build annotated bibliographies of books that existed during the time. So when you read these scholars, you know what all books they saw or they thought existed at that time. If you remember, I showed you the Falsafa of Ibn Tufail. That was such an annotated bibliography. He points to a very interesting game. He says the Hindus play chess in a very interesting way. He says, I had never seen this before. It's a 4-person chess. And he proceeds to describe it, and you can see this table that he draws and says, this is how they played, this is how the game starts, and this is how they played a 4-player chess. And later on, I did some research after reading this, because honestly, I didn't know about a 4-player chess. I had lived in India for 25 years, never seen it, never played it. Apparently, the game is called Chaturaji, and you can see a photograph of how the Chaturaji chess with 4 players is played. As I told you, Al-Biruni was very fond of Vasudeva, and so he provides a chart and says Vasudeva has many names, and he has a name for every month. So he says that in this month he's called Kesava, in the second month he's called Narayana, in the third month he's called Madhava, in the fourth Govinda, in the fifth month he's called Vishnu, and he provides a list of the names and the list of the months. I really didn't know this until recently. So in my first reading also, I probably skipped this chapter. So that was very interesting that he went to this great lengths to document this. And he talks about astrology, Hindu astrology. There are lots and lots of charts and all the different elements of Hindu astrology that he describes in great detail. I want to add the note that Al-Biruni did not like astrology. He thought it was a speculative and not really a true science. He believed in astronomy, and he was a great astronomer himself, as you can see from the diagram of the phases of the moon that he plotted. One of the chapters that he addresses is castes, and this, I think, is the 9th chapter in the book. There are 80 chapters in the book. One thing that is very interesting about Al-Biruni is that he's not trying to judge Hindus or what he found in their engagement. He learned the language, Sanskrit. He read all the creed texts. He engaged extensively with philosophers, Hindu teachers, and the Brahmins, and tried to be as, shall we say, uh, honest and truthful in his representation of their views. And whenever he found something that he didn't like, he would try to moderate the impact of his reporting by also saying, look, we also find these problems in our society, in Muslim societies. So when he addresses the caste system, he begins by first talking about how the ancient Iranian empire had caste system. So he says, when Ardashir ben Babak restored the Persian Empire, he also restored the classes or castes of the population in the following way. So he says that in the Iranian culture, the Persian culture, there were four castes. The first class were the knights and princes. The second were the monks and the fire priests and the lawyers. The third class, the physicians, astronomers, and other men of science. And the fourth class, the husbandmen and artisans. So the class system is not exactly like the Hindu system, Hindu or Indian caste system, but there was a caste system. So he's trying to say, look, this is not something that is unique to Hinduism or India. In Arabic, it could be al-Hind. So, but he says, look, I mean, the hierarchy is different. For example, the monks are higher in the Hindu system than the knights, who would be Kshatriyas. There is, no, I'm not very sure whether the physicians and professionals, scientists, etc., have a caste of their own, the businessmen, and then people who do ordinary work. So he goes on and identifies, basically, he says, there are 5 types of people in India. And he says they're all castes. The castes are called as varna, that is colors. And from a genealogical point of view, they call them jataka or births. And he says, so basically there are 4 castes. And he says the highest caste are the Brahmins, of whom the books of Hindus tell that they were created from the head of Brahman, the one god. And then he says the next caste is the Kshatriyas, and they are created from the shoulders and hands of Brahman. Then he says, after them follow the Vaisyas, who are created from the thigh of Brahman, and the Shudras, who were created from his feet. And then he identifies another group of people called Antyaja. He says these are people who are outcasts. They're not allowed to live in the same city. And it is very interesting in his description of the 4 castes, not the 5th one, which would be Dalits and Dalits and the untouchables, really. He says they were not allowed to live in the town. They lived outside and they did menial work, basically cleaning toilets and stuff like that. But of the other 4 castes, he says they mixed together, they ate together, they even married together. That was an interesting thing that he felt the need to identify. And then, of course, he also, like I said, he is quite fond of Krishna and Vasudeva. And so he goes back to the Bhagavad Gita and explains the Indian caste system based on how basically Vasudeva explains it to Arjuna. And it's very interesting as to how, in the point apparently Vasudeva was trying to make to Arjuna was that if you fulfilled your caste profile, like what is expected of you as a Brahmin, to become spiritual, to get religious knowledge, to preserve religious knowledge, to share religious knowledge, to Kshatriya, to be brave, to fight, to defend. He says, if you fulfilled what is expected of you based on your caste, then you will find happiness and you will rise. So that was a very interesting. Apparently, he found that interesting enough to repeat in his book. So Al-Biruni's book is fascinating. I only shared 4 or 5 chapters and its contents with you. Some of them I may not be interested. Some of them you might be interested. So go through it. It's encyclopedic. It's like Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah and his history of the world. So get a copy of Al-Biruni's India. I mean, this is an old copy and it's not very easy to read. So there are less expensive electronic digital versions on Amazon, which is what I downloaded. And so you are seeing the screenshots of Al-Biruni's ideas that I took from the digital version. So do read the book, especially if you are from India or if you are in India or if you're going to India, visiting India, curious about India. This is a fascinating book written by a person who had never lived in India and spent 13 years. It's also very interesting that once he got back, he lived after that in mostly in Western Afghanistan, what is today Western Afghanistan. And he did not embark on any other anthropological exercise beyond this. He came back to science and mathematics. And so basically, I think at the core, he was a philosopher slash mathematician slash interested in geometry, understanding the earth. It is also, I couldn't find the passage, but I remember it as to how while coming to India, he immediately realized that mountains, the Himalayas, and the entire Indian subcontinent was perhaps once submerged underwater and was perhaps under an ocean. So it's a pity that for some centuries his work was not very well known, but now it's widely known. And the British actually did a good job of making Al-Biruni's work known. And so I hope you found today's discussion useful. Please see if you can get a hold of Al-Biruni's India and browse through it, if not read it. So I hope you found this very interesting. So don't forget to subscribe to Conversations, like this video, press this bell icon. Don't forget to share with it. So well, this ends my Ramadan 2024 special series on classic books from the Islamic civilization. I perhaps will continue this even during the non-Ramadan month, or maybe again come back to it. There are so many other books I would love to share with you. And I hope you found this interesting. I might also do some classics from the Indian civilization. I have already done Arthashastra by Chanakya or Kautilya, and I've done that both in Hindi and English. So do take a look at it if you like. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you to ICCL for co-hosting this, and thank you to the two Khans for supporting it. And until next time, I'm your host, Muqtadar Khan. Eid Mubarak.